We are in Luke chapter 7, and by the looks of it, it's simply a story. And some of you have, like, Jesus heals a centurion servant. Okay, so a bit of information. Jesus heals a centurion's servant. Okay, there you go. By the way, Steve and Jackie, your volume is up. I can hear you. You can't hear me, but I can hear you. That's life. So the verse 1, when Jesus had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. That is a little more than simple information. And by the way, in this passage, as I was reading it, Luke, remember I've told you this before, Luke, because he's a doctor, uses words that the only place you're going to find him is in Luke. And that's, in a sense, kind of the way it is here. He uses phrases in such a manner, and he uses words, and I have to stop and think, now, why did he write it that way? And if I read it to you as the Greek gives it, it would be a little stilted, but nevertheless, I'm just going to give it to you as we would read it in English. So when he completed all his utterances for the hearing of the people, he went into Capernaum. That serves as both it's a transition. It concludes where we were for the last month and a half, 2 months in the Sermon on the Mount, and it moves us forward with something. I'll tell you what that something is at the end of the message. When it says he completed, the word completed is to fill up. And the phraseology is when he had filled up all his words, all his utterances. And you stop and think, what has transpired for the last 6 weeks or 2 months? I forget whether it's 8 sermons or 6 that Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talked. And if you remember, some of the things he said were very pithy. It's like 3 words, and then it takes me a whole sermon to explain those 3 words. But for the most part, when he says them, it's one of those things that just hits me between the eyes. So there was no, what I'm saying is, there was, with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, there was no loose words. Everything he said was a hammer or a bullet or something that would strike us where we are, or confront us in who we are, or confront our worldview. So when it was filled up, all the utterances, and then it says, for the hearing of the people, or in the hearing of the people, the word again is not the typical word for in. It's the word into the hearing of the people. And again, there's a focus here. I'm seeing that all through the book of Luke, that the words matter, the utterances matter, the things that are said. I mean, what did Jesus say in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount on verse 27 of chapter 6? But I say unto you who hear. It's a matter that words are not loosely given by Jesus, but they're given with a purpose to hit us, to cut into us, to cut through us, and to reach that spot where we live. So the first portion of verse 1 then, when Jesus had filled up all his words into or unto, we say for, the hearing of the people. So it was done. There was nothing more to say. As I said last week, whether he closed in prayer or just got up and walked away, he was done. There was no more to say. There was no Q&A. Anyone with the question? None of that. Then Luke does, for the second time in Luke, he says he went into Capernaum. He entered into Capernaum. And I have to stop and wonder, why didn't he just say, as you and I would say, he went into? But it's a double into. So he entered into Capernaum. And my only thought on that, as we saw when he entered into into the house of Peter to minister to the people there, that it's what you would call a commitment. It's not like the outskirts. It's not like just the anteroom or the outskirts, the suburbs of Capernaum. And in estimation, the conclusion I draw is that, and he doesn't say it this way, but he's going home. Remember, Jesus' home wasn't Nazareth. It was Capernaum. That's where he lived. That's where his center of operations were. He lived there. So when it says he entered into Capernaum, he's going home. There's what I would call a commitment to the location. He's there. So we finish up with that transition, or as you might say, the introduction to the story, and we get to verse 2. Now, a centurion's slave, being ill, was about to die, who was precious to him. Okay, as per usual, there's a number of things here. If you remember, a centurion is a Roman officer of roughly 100 men. And then there would be 10 of these, that would make up a cohort. So 10 100s would make up a cohort, and then 6 cohorts would make up a legion. So it's like the small unit becomes a bigger unit, becomes a part of the legion of 6,000 men. In time of, or rather if there wasn't war, there would be no soldiers in Capernaum. And honestly, I can't figure out whether they're at war or not, because there's a centurion, but it appears that he lives there. You all live in a location, Santa Margarita, Atascadero. That's your location. Well, his location was Capernaum. That's where he lived. And so this centurion, who would have been under the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, I believe, had a servant. Now, Lenski translates it as slave, the King James as servant, and the New American Standard as slave. The interesting thing is that Matthew, in this same portion, uses a different word than doulos. He uses the word pais, P-A-I-S. And the word pais can be used as servant, but can also be used as child or boy. And by the time we're done, Luke actually uses that word in this portion. But the first word here is a certain centurion had a slave who was having badly. He was having it badly. In fact, it was so bad that he was on the verge of, and again, Luke doesn't use the word for die. He uses the word to end. You know, when this sermon ends, we don't say it dies, but it ends, and that's what Luke says. He was so sick, he was having it so badly that he was on the verge of ending, and obviously that would be ending his days, ending his life. And we find this little note that Luke gives us about this centurion and the relationship to this servant, is that the servant was honored, estimable, dear, highly valued, precious, with the added potential of having the word costly. But I don't like to go there with that word for the simple reason that, did Wayne just die?
Sorry.
Wayne just died.
Sorry. We're good.
Ended.
You ended.
Okay, there I am.
You're good.
Okay, I'm alive. Oh, I almost ended. Oh, that was scary. I don't like to go with costly because then it sounds like, I've got all these slaves, but that one there, he's worth 1,000. The rest of them are only worth 100. I don't see that. I don't see that in any aspect of this story, that just because he was the most expensive slave, he was concerned. I see it as any of these other words, that he was dear or highly valued or precious. So this servant of this centurion was one that the centurion, how do you say, he liked. He had value in the fact that probably, and at camp, it was always great to have those staff members who would come up and say, I see that this is happening. I'm guessing you want me to take care of that? Man, yeah, I didn't know that was happening. Yeah, go take care of it. And they do. Those kind of staff, or in this case, servants, are the kind that, I mean, you can't put a value on it. So in verse 2, we find that the servant plays a part of this story, but only as it relates to how the centurion is going to relate to Jesus. So we have the centurion in the story, we have Jesus in the story, we have the servant in the story, but really the two main people in the story are the centurion and, of course, Jesus. So Jesus has entered town. In verse 3, now when the centurion heard concerning Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, requesting him that, having come, he bring his slave safely through. I'll explain that last portion. So when it says here, he heard concerning Jesus, I'm pretty certain that by this time he would have had to have his fingers in his ears the whole time that Jesus was ministering. This isn't the first time he heard about Jesus. He simply heard that Jesus was back into Capernaum. So he had come home. And because of the situation in which his slave was on the verge of dying and Jesus was back in town, Matthew tells us that he went, but it's pointed out that at camp, if I told Ashley or Courtney or Christiana, you go tell Margaret she needs to stop. And when they go with the name or the authority or the word of the camp director. They don't just go and say, I don't think it's a good idea that you do that. Well, who are you? You're not the camp director. Well, the camp director told me. So Matthew tells us that he went. Luke tells us that it wasn't the centurion that went, but those that the centurion sent. Well, those that the centurion sent are the voice of the centurion. Okay? So when he heard concerning Jesus, he sent to Jesus, and that word is the pros, it's toward, it's that which will, for the most part, most of the time it's translated as in your face, and I don't mean that negatively, I mean face to face. So to him, elders of the Jews. Who are these elders? Well, the elders would have been, it doesn't say religious elders, like we would think in a church or in the synagogue. These elders would have been the leaders of the city council, so to speak. The ones who would sit at the gate in the old sense, and people, there wasn't a courthouse, it was simply the gate of the city, and people would come and say, hey, I got this problem with my neighbor. Well, let's talk about it and see what the city needs to do about it. So it would have been those kind of things. And immediately we see that if a centurion has the kind of relationship with the city that he says, guys, I need your help. Yes, what can we do for you? I need you to go ask Jesus to please come and heal my servant. Oh, okay, not a problem. I guess I should ask, do you know of any city council members that would do that for you today? Just saying, I guess I don't know very many city council members, but you get the idea that this wasn't just some random, hey, servant, come here. These were actually the city leaders. So there's clout involved in the request here. There's another thing. The word requesting is I like to use the word request rather than ask. Asking is one thing, but I think requesting, it carries a little more weight or a slightly different shade of ask. A request is not a demand. We understand that. So there's a request on the part of the centurion via these leaders of the city to ask Jesus, and the way it's written in the Greek is, having come, Jesus bring his slave safely through. Well, when we read in the New American Standard, save the life of the slave who was about to die, or heal his slave, the word is actually to bring through. And I've seen that before. I've been on a road where all of a sudden something happens ahead of me and I'm going too fast to just slam on my brakes without hitting it. And you go safely through. You maneuver. And the thought here is that Jesus will bring his servant safely through this near-death experience. And that's the whole concept. He wants him to heal him. The word isn't the word for heal, it's to bring safely through. Again, another word that Luke is going to use, and the way he says it is very articulate. So we get that picture from Luke. So the guys go. On behalf of the centurion, they go, they find Jesus, and now they begin talking to him. Verse 4 and 5. But they, having come up to Jesus, began beseeching him earnestly, saying, worthy is he for whom thou shalt do this. Interesting way of saying it, that this is what you're going to do. It's not a demand, but when you do this, the guy who you're doing this for is worthy to have it done. And this is the reason why in verse 5. He loves our nation and himself built the synagogue for us. Okay, there's a lot going on here. So what the centurion said, guys, go request him please to come and see my servant safely through this near-death experience. They show up and they begin, and the word beseech has the concept of begging. It's an imploring. It's begging. And so they begin begging him, and when the word there is earnestly, it's diligently. In other words, it's like your dog. When your dog starts barking, it's like, okay, until you take care of that business, it's diligently going to keep doing until it sees the raccoon run away or whatever's going on. So they began earnestly, beseeching him, begging him, and they made the point. The first thing they say is, if there's anybody that you should do this for, this guy has absolute value in this. He is worthy of whatever you do. When you do this, he is worthy of it. That means he is, whatever the action is, that action certainly would match the reward, the worthiness of this character, the deservingness of this man. This man, keep in mind, this man is not from the nation of Jews. He lives in the nation of Jews, but he's from another country. He is a foreigner. He is a Gentile. But what do these Jewish elders know? They know that this man loves these people. And who are these people? They're all the people of the nation of Israel. So wherever he goes, let's see, what's the phrase now? It's not, I'm not trying to go with BLM, but it's racism. He is not a racist. He loves us all. He loves our people. And he's not from here. And that is their emphasis, that this foreigner loves us, and they didn't have to say this, but they could have, more than our own leaders do. That's kind of a interesting thought. How do we know this? Well, they know it by his actions. We already saw that back in the Sermon on the Mount, where what's inside is going to come out and reveal itself from us. But at one point, too, your words have to be some way expressed in actions. And what was his action? When it says he himself built the synagogue for us, that was from his own pocketbook. So when it gets down to it, let's say we're going to tear this down and build a new one, and all of you give $1. Okay, so you all gave something. I mean, it's our church. You gave something. But somebody comes in and they say, I believe in you. I believe in what's going on here. So I'm going to give $1 million for you guys to put up, marble here and a little thing for Wayne so there's a light on him and smoke machine so that you always think he's... Sorry. But you get the idea. They couldn't build their synagogue for themselves. So this guy says, I'll build it because I believe in you. And I believe in what you believe. So there's a lot going on here, revelatory of this man's heart. And Jesus, because this guy is a Gentile, and you can see it there in verse 9,000. In other words, it's not there. Jesus doesn't say he's a Gentile. Sorry. I'm only here to minister to the Jews. No, we find in verse 6 that Luke tells us, now Jesus started on his way with them. So they come up, and he consents, whether it's a nod or okay or whatever, he begins to go with them. So somebody within that group, whether it's a servant of one of the elders I imagine wouldn't have run on ahead. I imagine they would have walked with him to lead the way. So I imagine it was just one of the servants, one of the lackeys, would have run to the house of the centurion and said, all right, he's coming. What would you have done as a Gentile, as a leader among Gentiles, as somebody with power? What would you have done? What would your attitude have been? We find that in that next part of verse 6, but while Jesus was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, stop! Stop troubling yourself, for I am not, and here we have again another word for worthy. Lenski says sufficient. The other translations say worthy. It's not the same word as the others, so we'll just have to get somewhere in between sufficient and worthy. We'll just say worthy. I am not worthy that thou shouldst enter under my roof. There's an interesting thought. A centurion is nobody to be sneezed at. A centurion actually has clout. The centurion was respected even among the Roman Empire. They only chose the best, the creme de la creme, to be a centurion, because they had to be like we count on our sergeants. That's a real small group, much smaller than 100. But we count on our sergeants to lead the men. The centurion was going to lead 100 men, probably into battle. So here's a guy, has all of this, and what's his attitude? It says friends. So it doesn't say the elders, they're already all gone. And it doesn't say his servants, it says his friends. Who would these have been? Potentially they would have been Gentile friends, maybe Jewish friends. It doesn't say. There's no delineation there of that. But he sends them with this quick message, and the word is stop troubling. There's a way, it's a mechanism in the Greek that it's like the action that you're doing, cease and desist. But what is it? It's troubling yourself further. Please don't come into my house. I'm not worthy for you to enter into my house. The scary thing for him, as a man who loved the Jews, and he wasn't a Jew, was if this great man Jesus, this rabbi, was to enter his house, he would be unclean. It wasn't a good thing for a Jew to enter into a Gentile's house. They would be unclean. And can you imagine just a regular Joe like us, but Jesus entering into that house? This guy knew the situation, and he said, don't. You don't need to come into my house. Please don't come into my house. Don't trouble yourself in that sense any further. For I am not worthy that you should enter in. In fact, he continues with that thought in verse 7. Wherefore I do not deem myself worthy to come to thee. I am not worthy, even though I am a centurion, I am not worthy to enter into your presence. Now there's something in here. If you haven't noticed so far, on mine I put stars by it. I didn't put stars by yours. But 3 times in this passage, worthiness is mentioned. Once on behalf of the elders of the Jews regarding this man, saying if there's anybody worthy, this guy is. And twice in 2 verses, this guy on his part telling Jesus, I am not worthy. I'm not worthy to have you enter my house, and I'm not worthy to enter into your presence. What's the word we use on that? Oh, humility. Now stop and think about that. Is this guy one of those poor me type of people? You've met them. Oh, poor me. I'm not worthy. He can't be that kind of person if he is a centurion. He can't be this kind of person if he has elders on his side, if he has friends on his side who, at a moment's notice, keep in mind that if he starts walking from the Hart's place down to here, it's not going to take him 3 hours. So by the time whoever was there with them comes here and says, okay, good stuff, he's on his way. What? No! Bobby, come here. Go tell him. Stop troubling yourself. I'm not worthy for you to enter my house. And this was a part of his message. In verse 7, say the word, speak the word, say a word, and my servant shall be healed. You have to stop. Is this centurion telling Jesus what to do? Because you could read it that way if you wanted. But if you're able to read this and see the humility in this man's heart, he's not telling Jesus what to do. He's revealing his own heart to Jesus. Jesus, you don't need to enter into my house to heal my servant. Others may need to have you come and touch them or pray over them. I don't need you to do that. I know your abilities. I know who you are. And I need to go back because I missed it in verse 6. You can see that the word Lord is there. We are always confronted with that. Did he simply mean sir? Which you could take it that way. Or guy who is deserving of the word master? Or is this centurion in such a place in his life where he recognizes having heard, and as a centurion he would have had to have heard these things. He has to have his ears out there. Who is in rebellion? Who potentially is giving a different message? Well, the message would have been there that the kingdom of God has come. That message was very clear. Everybody was saying it because that's what Jesus told him to say. So what was this centurion saying to Jesus when he said, stop troubling yourself, when he said, Lord? I believe that this man understood the Jewish doctrine that Emmanuel from Isaiah was coming. God with us was coming. And when he heard the message, the kingdom of God is at hand, the kingdom of God is here, that he believed that. And when he called him Lord, as we saw in chapter 6, verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say? This man, a Gentile, says, Lord, stop troubling yourself. I do not deem myself worthy to come to thee, but all you need to do, I know you, all you need to do is say a word, and my servant will be healed. And And by the way, there in verse 8, the man is saying my pace, my boy, my servant. So, again, I see this as the centurion's tenderness toward his precious slave, and he doesn't want his precious slave to die, not because it's going to cost him money, but because he loves the slave. He loves the people. He's a loving man, and we don't typically look at the Roman Empire in that way. A side note, and something that I read, and I haven't checked it out, but I'll tell you now, that every time a centurion is mentioned in the scriptures, never once are they listed as somebody like this. They're always somebody who is either like this guy, or they're thoughtful and at least able to discern wisely. So just an aside there. So now in verse 8, the man tells Jesus exactly what he sees Jesus as. He says, I am a man set under authority. In other words, I answer to people. And yet, on the other hand, that's not there. That's me. With that truth, the other truth is I have soldiers under me. So I'm one who is under authority, and there's my humble position. But at the same time, I'm given authority within that to have soldiers under me. And when I say to this one, go, that's what he does. He goes. And if I say to somebody else, come, he comes. And if I say to my servant, do this, that's what he does. In other words, if I, who am under the authority of somebody else, am able to direct with commands, I know you can. So in verse 9, we get this. I love it because you, if we could see Jesus with a surprised look on his face. I'm not exactly sure that's possible, but this says it kind of. He says in verse 9, now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him. He was amazed. Because here's a Gentile, and here's a soldier, and he's revealing to Jesus that he knows Jesus can do this simply by speaking a word. Be healed. My servant will be healed. That's this man's faith. So Jesus then turns to the crowd that was following him. Boy, talk about a teaching moment. And he says, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. Now, I hate to say this, but that's a slam. All of you should have this faith. And in all of Israel, I haven't found such great faith as this man. He's telling me you don't even need to come. I don't want to trouble you. You're important. I'm not. Yes, I'm a centurion. Yes, I have shiny armor and a shiny helmet and a very sharp sword. But I don't hold a candle to you. All you need to do is speak, and my servant will be healed. The beauty of this, in verse 10, when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. So you have Jesus now stopped because of now the second group that's come. The city leaders are there. And now the friends are there. And all the crowd, which would have included, of course, his 12, the 12 he chose, they heard this. And all these people, it's a learning moment. It's a learning moment. And he turns and says, not in all of Israel have I found such great faith. And the story, in a sense, ends there. And Jesus, whether he does it with a hand or says, you can go, I'm pretty sure that Jesus didn't say in front of them, be healed. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure Jesus just went like this And the elders did an about face, the friends did an about face. They got back to the house, and they entered through their front door, and there's the centurion, and there's his best slave. Well, obviously, Matthew tells us the problem was he was paralyzed. Keep in mind that Matthew was there, Luke wasn't there, but Luke went to others and heard the message, and for him, I found it unusual that Luke didn't tell us what the sickness was, but it didn't matter because that wasn't his point. His point, and this is where I told you that Luke had something important to share with us. There was something important that Luke wanted to get across following the Sermon on the Mount. Remember the very first thing in the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus said, "Blessed the beggarly." What did we see 3 times in here? We saw that everyone considered this man worthy, but this man himself did not consider himself worthy. How is it that everyone in the audience, everyone in the area looked at this man as being worthy of Jesus' attention, and yet this man, knowing his heart, didn't see that he held a candle to this amazing person named Jesus, whom he addressed as Lord, whom he had what I consider the beggarly attitude needed to have the kingdom of God in his heart. So as we reach the conclusion here, and I think the first portion was a Gentile, that is a centurion, seeks Jesus' help. Okay, that's pretty innocuous, but Jesus sees a Gentile's faith and Jesus responds to it. But where did that faith come from? That faith came from a heart that was practicing the initial thing on the Sermon on the Mount, which this guy wouldn't have even heard because Jesus just showed up. This man possessed the very thing that Luke shares with us as the first item in the Sermon on the Mount, a beggarly heart. The centurion has a beggarly heart before God. Look at this story as one in which a man recognizes his need before God. And he has such a great heart that it's not even on his behalf, but it's on behalf of who? The least. He's a servant. The servant doesn't deserve any attention. And yet this centurion, this man of leadership, this man of power, this man of respect and ability, sees himself in God's sight as one who needs to beg, request, please, and don't even come into my house. You don't need to. I know your ability. All you need to do is speak a word, and my servant will be healed. I mean, that is one of those wow moments of trust. Right now, in the book of Luke, if you want to be like anybody, be like the centurion. He's a great example for all of us. So the story isn't just Jesus heals the centurion's servant. I would call that rather innocuous, rather benign, but rather Jesus responds to a Gentile's faith, and that carries a lot of weight. So today, if you would simply always reconsider, and I think about it all the time now that I've finished the Sermon on the Mount, is where is my heart? What's my heart like before God? And yesterday I'm sitting in my chair and I'm thinking, God, how's my heart doing? You know what? I need to address some things with you, because that's what a beggar does with the master. So there you have it. It's not just a story, but rather it's an illustration that Luke gives us on those who are practicing the beggarly heart before God, and how that reaches into the whole crowd was affected. The elders were affected. The friends were affected. The centurion was affected. The whole household was affected by this Gentile's faith. Let's be like him. Father, thank you so much for your goodness to us in every way. As our hearts are appropriately placed before you in a beggar's position, to where we empty ourselves of who we are and allow you to do your work in us, you have something you wish to accomplish. And Father, this centurion, this man who could have ordered destruction, instead goes to bat on behalf of a slave, and in that reveals his own heart, the treasures of his own heart, a treasury that says, I am filled with what God would deem is good and righteous and caring and compassionate and merciful. And Jesus responds, can you imagine? Jesus responds, I haven't found so great a faith in all of Israel. Wow! And it is done to him according to his faith. So, Lord, this week, may we find ourselves placing ourselves in a position of a beggar to trust you and watch for what you're going to do in our lives. So we commit our way to you in the name of the Master, Jesus Christ. Amen.